it's kind of both of your answers, Emma.
It's the bee murderer.
Yeah. For his heroism, the beekeeper was rewarded with something special. What gift was given to the beekeeper?
I've learned in life there is only one real gift, and it's money. So I think they gave him a check for $10,000.
No, he got to throw out the first pitch.
Oh, who cares, right?
And that's it for this episode of Because News. Our champion today, it's Maggie Casella. Congratulations, Maggie. You have the honor of reading our credits.
I'm sorry.
I am Gavin Crawford. May the 4th be with you. That's not a Star Wars joke. I just have a caramel stuck in my teeth. We'll see you next week. Why? Thank you very much for being here, everybody. Give it up for Maggie Casella, Miguel Rivas, and Emma Hunter.
Hey, Canada, this is Maggie Casella speaking, winner of, yes, you guessed it, Because News. Congratulations to my runners-up, Emma Hunter and Miguel Rivas. Because News is written and produced by Shannon Higgins, David Carroll, Gavin Crawford, Phil Long, and Jess Klimowski. This week they had help from Alice Moran, John Blair, and Alessandra Vite. Rounding out the team, Aaron Conway, Brownwyn Page, Chris Lyons, and our recording engineer, Paul Hodge.
This is CBC Radio 1, 990 AM, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg.
Hearts will race.
Beverly Haven Kennedy's well ahead of the rest.
Champions will emerge.
The Canadian is a champion.
Medals will shine.
Naganos gets the gold.
The best of the best are set to compete for Paralympic glory. Experience the extraordinary with extended live event coverage and full event replays. The 2024 Paralympics begin August 28th, live from Paris. Watch free on CBC Gem.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere. Download the CBC Listen app for free.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At noon, it's sunny and 25 downtown. It's 26 in Deerwood and 15 in Churchill. The Democratic Party is poised to officially nominate Kamala Harris as the party's nominee for president. Thousands of party members are in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. The party has largely fallen in line, seeing Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as the future. But tonight, they're expected to hear from the man currently occupying the Oval Office. Ithel Musa has more from Chicago.
This convention really is about presenting Harris and Walz's vision for America and contrasting them with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance. Today's theme at the convention is for the people. So it's expected we'll hear more about the social policies this ticket believes will help support everyday Americans. Issues like affordability, healthcare, and abortion rights. Harris's candidacy has really rejuvenated the party, and the hope now is that she and Walz will keep that momentum going. U.S. President Joe Biden will be making tonight's keynote address, and he'll likely receive a very warm welcome. His speech will also be a farewell to Democrats and a symbolic handoff to a new leader. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Chicago, Illinois.
For now, the Biden administration is trying to use its influence with Israel to push for a ceasefire. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says in Tel Aviv this morning, part of the diplomatic push to end the Israel-Hamas war. The CBC's Sasha Petrusik is in Jerusalem with the latest.
Welcome again to Israel.
As Washington's top diplomat arrives for his 9th trip to the Middle East since the Gaza war started, the pressure is on, says Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
This is a decisive moment, probably the best, maybe the last opportunity to get the hostages home, to get a ceasefire, and to put everyone on a better path to enduring peace and security.
The U.S. is optimistic a deal based on proposals from President Joe Biden 3 months ago is close to agreement, but significant differences remain. There is much at stake. No deal could spark a much larger conflict in the region as Iran has threatened to attack Israel. That makes continued talks this week in Cairo critical. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Here in Winnipeg, about a dozen postal workers are demonstrating outside a Canada Post sorting facility. They're holding a mock funeral to draw attention to a new sorting system, which they say eliminates jobs and creates more work for letter carriers. Sean Tugby heads the Winnipeg chapter of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Tugby says the new sorting system starts today at the downtown facility where they are protesting.
And it also increased the route sizes from an average letter carrier walk being about 23,000 steps a day up to 37,000 steps a day. It also starts routes a little bit later, working workers into the later in the hours, and it's also so we diminished light in the wintertime and the summertime starting in peak heat.
Tugby says the union hopes the protest will convince Canada Post to address the letter carriers' concerns. RCMP investigators are continuing to piece together what led to 4 deaths in McCreary. On Friday, there were 3 homicides and 1 self-inflicted death. The RCMP says there is no risk to the public, but people in the region are reeling. Robert Brunel is the mayor of the neighboring community of St. Rose.
Hearing the news out of McCreary was, quite shocking, and it's pretty close to home, being really our neighboring community, and there's a lot of ties between our communities, so it was definitely saddened and shocked to hear the devastating news.
Brunel says during these times, communities will come together to support each other. Ukraine's president says his military's operation in Russia's Kursk region is going as planned. Volodymyr Zelensky says the incursion into Russia is creating a buffer zone. Ukraine says it has seized more than 80 settlements. Julia Chapman has the latest.
2 weeks since Ukrainian troops marched into Russia, President Volodymyr Zelensky is becoming more open about his aims. He says the army wants to create a buffer zone to better protect Ukrainian territory. Damaging Russian capabilities is also a priority. Mykola Leschuk says the move will disrupt Russian logistics. Ukraine has thrown significant manpower at the Kursk offensive, but that is triggering repercussions elsewhere. On Sunday, a border village in the Sumy region was targeted with a Russian-guided aerial bomb. Its mayor says a TV tower and a family home were hit, killing a man and injuring his young daughter. It's because of attacks like these that Ukraine wants to push the front line further from its own settlements. Julia Chapman, CBC News, London.
And finally, Phil Donahue, whose pioneering daytime talk show launched the television genre that made household names of Oprah Winfrey, Montel Williams, Ellen DeGeneres, and many others, has died. NBC's Today Show said Donahue died Sunday. After a long illness, he was dubbed the king of daytime talk. Donahue was the first to incorporate audience participation into a talk show, typically during a full hour with a single guest. His show racked up 20 Emmy Awards as well as a Peabody for Donahue in 1980. Phil Donahue was 88. And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 12:30. For news anytime, you can always head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. It's Monday, August 19th. My name is Chloe Friesen. I'm filling in for Janet Stewart. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Coming up, remember when kids left the house at the crack of dawn to play all day outside in the summer, only to come back home when the street lights turned on? Maybe you were one of those kids. These days, front lawns, parks, and streets seem pretty empty. Coming up on our call-in conversation, we want to hear your thoughts on summertime outdoor play. How did you play as a kid? How can we get kids back outside? But first, we'll hear from the Reeve of McCreary, who says his community is still in shock after learning of a triple homicide in the municipality on Friday morning. The municipality of McCreary has been in shock since Friday. That's when RCMP shared the news of 4 people found dead near the community, with 3 of those deaths being investigated as homicide. St. Rose du Lac RCMP responded to a call on Road 84 West in the rural municipality of McCreary at 10:10 a.m. on Friday. A 41-year-old man was found dead from a self-inflicted injury at that location. A half hour later, RCMP were asked to do a well-being check on a 37-year-old woman. They couldn't find her at her residence, which led them to a nearby home. RCMP say that's where they found the bodies of a 66-year-old woman and 2 men, aged 65 and 35. Meanwhile, the 37-year-old woman was found safe later in the afternoon and was taken to hospital as a precaution. All victims were known to each other. CBC's Gavin Axelrod spoke with Municipality of McCreary Reeve, Richard Sonnenberg, yesterday.
We feel terrible. The whole community feels terrible, and it's a horrible thing, and I'd like to express our deepest condolences to both the families for the grief they're experiencing today, and that's from the whole community.
This must be something you probably never expected to happen in your community.
No, and I think every community is the same. Nobody expects, you hear about it, you expect it not to happen in your community, but here we are, it's happened, and it's terrible. It's devastating for the whole community and for all the people involved.
How would you describe the rural municipality of McCreary to those who have never been there before?
Oh, it's a very quiet area. We get a lot of people wanting to retire in this area. It's what can I say? It's a quaint, tiny little town, but this is devastating.
And for you as a municipal leader, what's this like, having to navigate something like this?
It's terrible. It's something when I went in on council I never thought I would have to deal with. And knowing very well that something horrific can happen any time, but you just don't expect it.
What would your message be to a community, like we've been talking to people and people are just in shock? What would your message be to people who are grieving and in shock right now?
Well, just stay strong and we'll hopefully we can get some help for the people that need it here. Once we get a little farther into this, there's been no statements made from the RCMP or anything yet. So we'll wait in there, and when we hear from them, we'll try and whoever needs help, we'll get it for them.
And I know this also probably weighs a lot on the first responders who responded to this call yesterday. What would your message to them be?
Well, that was going to be my next comment. I want to thank all the first responders that come and deal with these situations. It's a horrible thing, and from the bottom of our hearts, we thank them for everything they do in some of the situations they get into. It's terrible. Just to the families everybody in the community is thinking of you, and again, our deepest condolences to the families.
That's the Reeve of the Municipality of McCreary, Richard Sonnenberg. He spoke with CBC reporter Gavin Axelrod yesterday. For more on this story, visit our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Your local news at your fingertips.
CBC News has a local news app made for your phone or tablet.
So don't waste time scrolling for the local stories you want. Just download the app to get the information that matters to you when it happens.
And how you want it.
Another way to get your local news. The CBC News app. Download it today.
It is 12:11 p.m. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 97.9 FM in Brandon, and everywhere on the CBC Listen app. I'm Chloe Friesen, filling in for Janet Stewart. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Coming up on today's Calling Conversation, screen time is getting in the way of more physical activity by Canadian kids and teens. That's according to the Canadian group Participaction that promotes active living. How concerned are you that kids aren't playing outdoors as much as they should? A data scientist from Participaction will join us coming up on our Calling Conversation after the 12:30 news here. How do you think we can get more kids playing outside? What was outdoor play like for you when you were a kid? Our phone lines will open just after the 12:30 news, but you can already text us if you want to get this conversation going. We would love to hear from you. That number is 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. 7355 to send us a text here on Radio Noon. Taking a look at our forecast right now in Brandon, mostly cloudy skies, 24 degrees. Dauphin, mainly sunny, also 24. Thompson, cloudy skies and 18. We're going to see those temperatures feel even warmer than they are with the humidex. Very humid conditions across the province. Here in Winnipeg, we're looking at a mix of sun and clouds, a high of 28. Now stay tuned. Lots still to come here on Up to Speed. And there I go again. This is Radio Noon, not Up to Speed. That comes on at 3 o'clock. You won't want to miss it. I just said that so that I could talk about the show and encourage you to listen. Let's play a song so I can escape this embarrassing moment. This next artist describes herself as a storyteller with a voice as limitless as the prairie sky. Here's Manitoba's own Diaphony with a new tune. This is Maggie.
You took your time to come into my life, Maggie. I almost thought you would never arrive, Maggie. In almost an instant, I knew that I couldn't lie, Maggie. You take away all my sorrows and pain, Maggie. You shine the light where there was only rain, Maggie. You come along and surprise me again and again, Maggie, oh Maggie. It's always been hard just to show all my cards, Maggie. I've been afraid to let go of my heart, Maggie. But something in you has convinced me I have to start. Maggie, you got me. You'll never drop me. Maggie, you'll never let me down. You keep my head up high in the sky. You keep my feet on the ground. Oh, Maggie. Now, every day, it's a pleasure to say, Maggie. Even alone, I'm no longer afraid, Maggie. You gave me back all that I gave away. Maggie, you got me. You'll never drop me. Maggie,
It's a brand new song from Manitoba's own Diaphony. That song was called Maggie. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and anywhere on your CBC Listen app. Or, I forgot to mention, our YouTube live stream. Good afternoon to all those watching on YouTube. And thank you to Travis Peterson for making us just look so snazzy. Now, the Olympics are over for this year, but the world is getting ready for the Paralympics in Paris later this month. Canada's women's sitting volleyball team is based in Edmonton. They hope to get a spot on the podium after finishing 4th at the Tokyo Paralympics. CBC's Emily Williams dropped by one of their practices.
It starts even before you qualify. Like, it starts the day after Tokyo, and honestly, for me. So getting 4th in Tokyo was the honestly ultimate motivation. Hi, my name is Heidi Peters. I'm an athlete on Team Canada Women's Sitting Volleyball. I'm from actually a small community called Nearlandia, which is about 90 minutes northwest of Edmonton. First of all, I played volleyball my whole life. It's always been my favorite sport. I unfortunately lost my left leg below the knee to bone cancer at age 16. I thought I would never play volleyball again, especially the way I wanted to, competitively. And then I found my teammate, my current still teammate, Joanne Wong. She was a volunteer at the Stollery, and she previously in her life had the same cancer as me, and she told me about sitting volleyball, and now I've been on the team for 11 years. I really don't have words for how excited I am. It is quite literally a dream come true, but a dream I never knew I had, which is kind of surreal. It's like this thing my life has become, and I've made everything about myself, and I would have it no other way. It is like literally pure magic being on the Paralympic stage. It is in the Athletes Village. It's just a magic world built for people with disabilities, maximum accessibility. It is so unique, so amazing. I wish my whole life was like that all the time. And it is so powerful outside of the sport. And it's really just the closest thing I can get to magic. And I love it.
We're going until you get stopped. And if you forget to go in on defense, just like Hello, my name is Nicole Ban, and I'm the head coach of Team Canada Women's Sitting Volleyball. And I've actually been with the team almost 10 years now, but I started off with very humble beginnings. We were ranked, I think, like 20th in the world at that point, and we've grown a lot since, and here we are going to our 3rd Paralympic Games. We train at the Edmonton Volleyball Pickleball Center on the south. They just opened another location, so we're on the south side, and we train actually on a pickleball court, but we set up a sitting volleyball net. So the dimensions of the court are quite similar to ours, and they've actually put down lines here for us at the facility, and they're really, really supportive of us on our journey to Paris. And it's great to have a space that's a little bit smaller, because for those of you that don't know, a sitting volleyball court is on each side of the court 6 meters wide by 5 meters long, and the net actually sits at 1 meter 5 centimeters in the women's game. So if you've never seen sitting volleyball, first of all, tune in on CBC when we start on August 29th. We'd love for you to watch us. But the game is essentially a smaller court of volleyball, and it's a sport that's played sitting down. So the athletes on our team are mostly amputees. They do not need to wear a prosthetic to play. They're actually not able to unless it's an upper limb prosthetic. So they move with their hands and with the limbs that they have on the ground. And the game is essentially much faster because you're sitting on the ground. The ball doesn't need to travel as far. Being a national team, we have athletes that are across the whole country because we are West Coast based, and we've been out of Edmonton for as long as I've been with the program. We have 4 athletes currently from Edmonton. We have a few more athletes from rural areas within the province. We have 3 athletes from British Columbia, and then the rest are from Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan. And so we're hoping that by some exposure through the Paris Paralympics that we do find some new athletes. But I honestly, just before practice, talked to the girls about how proud I am of them and how ready we are. It's the first time heading into a Paralympics where we're no longer the underdog, and we've done the work this summer to be ready.
Honestly, it still feels a little bit surreal to me. This will be my very first Paralympic Games. Hi, my name is Allison Lang. I am an athlete on Team Canada's women's sitting volleyball team. We're headed to the Paris Paralympics this summer, and I'm also a disability advocate on social media and a disabled model. I think one thing that we're really focusing on right now is placing Canada on the map for volleyball. You know, sitting volleyball is still an unrecognizable sport. Not many people know what it is, and we're trying to bring so much awareness to that. And they were so close in Tokyo by getting 4th place, and our goal at this Games is to make the podium, make people more aware of what sitting volleyball is, bring awareness to it, hopefully recruit more athletes. And I mean, nothing would feel better than to come home with a medal after adjusting, running more speed, being more aggressive on court. And those are all things that we've been building on. And I think it's time to change the name of the game and make the Paralympics more equal to the Olympics, because that's what para means. It's a Latin derivative, which means parallel. They run parallel, side by side, and I would just like to see more recognition for parasport because it's so much fun.
That was Team Canada at a sitting volleyball training session in Edmonton. I am so excited to watch that team in action. They compete in the Paralympics starting August 29th. And of course, you can watch the games on CBC Gem.
Female athletes have always needed grit and talent. But for decades, they've also needed a certificate
to prove that they were actually women, according to different definitions.
And even now, they're still being checked and questioned. Their story is the newest podcast series from CBC and NPR's Embedded. It's called Tested.
Tested, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
23 minutes after 12 o'clock, you're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. Canada's telecom regulator made a ruling last week that's meant to create more competition in the internet services space. The decision means starting in February, large telephone companies must give smaller competitors access to their fiber networks for a fee. This past weekend on CBC's Just Asking, callers gave their thoughts on telecom costs and competition. Vas Bednar answered their questions. She's the executive director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy program. Here's what some callers shared with her and host Saroja Coelho.
I feel like there's a quick end to any startup. The majors, the 3 big players, will gobble up any upstart and control the narrative, control the pricing, and control the benefits. And as they expand into television and healthcare and security, they seem to be more and more dominant in our daily lives. My main question would be what levers consumers have in order to encourage the government to force more competition.
When you look at complaints, the Commission for Complaints for Telecom and Television Services, every year they are going up and up and up. So Canadians are dissatisfied and they are expressing that. So I think we know there's a problem in terms of we need more or better competition. You often hear that word more, right? But what does it mean to have more competition or more effective competition? And so many of these firms are much more than a telecom. TELUS's fastest area of growth is in health services. When we think about a different telecom company coming here or starting here, they're actually just competing in kind of one node of that ecosystem. And that diversification is smart and savvy, but it's tough to beat.
When Shaw got into the mobile market, they had this fantastic introductory deal that if you brought your own phone, you got 30 gigs unlimited text and calls for $25 a month. And then when it switched over to Rogers very shortly after that, I just kind of had to fight really hard to get that deal honored. But all the deals dried up after that. Why would they approve a deal between 2 really large competitors like that?
Technically, by the Canadian competition law that existed at that time, it was a permissible merger. And part of our history, we've also valued finding efficiency. One other element that I think is important here is the illusion of rivalry that exists, especially in telecom, because of all those flanker brands. So you can shop around for a deal and think you're getting a great deal from Fido, but guess who owns Fido? Rogers. There are structural factors that inherently limit how much competition we have in this sector. And it comes down to sharing and accessing that physical infrastructure.
For me, cell phones back home is something that is an essential part of your day-to-day life. And when I came over here, I saw that the services are the same, but the costs are exorbitantly high. I don't understand why are we paying that much amount of money.
I think the word essential is really important here. And I think when these services started, they were icing, they were gravy, they were a special treat that some people had. But now they are essential to participate in the economy, to stay connected, to communicate. We don't necessarily reflect that yet. We haven't deemed these services as being essential. And if we look at them now in that light, what is the role of the state to make these markets more free and fair? How can the government level the playing field? It really feels that things are out of whack here. And especially when we start to look at other jurisdictions, it's not something we're proud of here in Canada. And I think it's getting harder and harder to defend.
You can listen to Just Asking wherever you find your podcasts, and you can also join the conversation on Saturday afternoons on CBC Radio 1. I'm Chloe Friesen, filling in for Janet Stewart here on Radio Noon. We're looking at wind shifting out of the south overnight, which is going to flush out a lot of that haze that's been here in southern Manitoba. I don't know about you. I've definitely smelled it and kind of felt it over the last couple of days here, so that wind will hopefully shift it out of southern Manitoba. Temperatures will remain above seasonal throughout much of the week in our province. Here in Winnipeg today, we're looking at a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 28, although with the humidity feeling more like 32. And that's a similar story kind of across our province with temperatures around those 28, 29, 30s, but the humidex making things feel a lot warmer. Coming up on our call-in conversation, the way kids play now is very different from decades ago when kids roamed the neighborhoods all day until the streetlights turned on. We want to know, how did you play as a kid? What do you think needs to change about the way kids play or don't play now? You can call our call-in conversation starting after the 12:30 news, but if you would like to text us, you can already start doing that. 204-588-7355. Screen time is a factor here. It's getting in the way of more physical activity by Canadian kids and teens. That's according to the Canadian group Participaction that promotes active living. We want to hear from you. How concerned are you that your kids aren't playing outdoors as much as they should? We are going to hear from a scientific director with Participaction about the research they have done and the tips and tricks they have. We would love for you to call in our conversation. Questions about what types of play? Is play too safe? Are playgrounds fun enough for kids these days? You can let us know. You can call us at 204-780-0893 or text at 204-588-7355. That's coming up after your CBC local news.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon, I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At 12:30, it's sunny and 26 downtown, 27 in Dauphin, and 17 in Gillam. The death of a 23-year-old man Saturday afternoon from Garden Hill First Nation is being investigated as a homicide. The man was taken to the community's nursing station with life-threatening injuries where he was declared dead. Island Lake RCMP have arrested a 15-year-old boy. He was charged with manslaughter on Sunday and is being held in custody. About a dozen workers are outside a downtown Canada Post facility protesting changes they say are harmful to letter carriers. The changes involve a new sorting system, which they say eliminates jobs. Sean Tugby heads the Winnipeg chapter of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. He says route sizes will increase from 23,000 steps a day to 37,000. Tugby says letter carriers will be forced to start work later. That means working in peak heat in the summer and darkness in winter.
Today we're having a mock funeral for the lost jobs, for the lost opportunities, for the lost work-life balance, for the lost health and safety provisions. Working people later and darker and longer, we're harming and hurting people, and we just want that to stop.
Tugby is also concerned the new sorting system will also delay some mail delivery. Wet weather over the weekend is helping firefighters working in BC. The province's wildfire service says cooler temperatures are also helping. A storm system pushed inland from the coast over the weekend. That increased the humidity in some of the driest areas of the province. Dry conditions, however, are persisting in the north. And a Canadian convenience store chain is making a big play to buy 7-Eleven. Couche-Tard has made an offer to buy all shares of the company. Nisha Patel reports.
I need a taquito. What do you want? If you want it, we can get it from the 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven is one of the world's biggest convenience store chains. It has 84,000 locations across 19 countries. Now its parent company, Japan's 7-Ai, is the target of a takeover by a much smaller Canadian rival, Montreal-based Couche-Tard, which operates about 14,000 Circle K stores. Couche-Tard confirmed it's made a friendly bid, but it's not certain a deal will be reached. The companies haven't revealed any details, though before the offer, the 7-Eleven owner was valued at about $31 billion. The Japanese retailer says its board of directors has created a special committee to review the proposal. If Couche-Tard is successful, it could be the biggest foreign takeover of a Japanese company. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 1:30.
Thanks, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Josh Crabb here on Radio Noon. I'm Chloe Friesen filling in for Janet Stewart today, and Riley Lachuk joins me now in the studio for a look at the forecast.
We're going to start talking by talking about wildfires.
Okay.
Because I know there's some concerns, particularly in northern Manitoba, Chloe, about wildfires. So I want to talk in particular about that fire that we've been hearing about over the weekend and certainly late last week that's been burning near Bunnabonaby.
Right.
Cree Nation.
And there's been evacuations.
Yes, there's been some evacuations in that area, especially through the later part of last week. So that fire now is about 11,000 hectares in size, burning south of the community, still out of control. The cause of that fire was natural, indicating that perhaps started by lightning, for example, is what that would mean. But the reason I want to talk about it now is because with that fire burning south of the community, we are going to see winds shifting around out of the south. So a couple of things. That's going to flush some of that smoke and that haze out of southern Manitoba, but has the potential to push that fire back toward the community as we get into the middle part of this week, which we'll get into here. So there's some give and take here with the wind shifting around, but certainly still keeping an eye on that one at 11,000 hectares. I expect that we'll probably get an update on that as we get through the later afternoon in terms of the movement and the size of that fire. Temperatures right now, 17 in Gillam, 19 in Thompson. We're certainly seeing a bit of a cooler day through parts of northern Manitoba today. Into the south, though, temperatures in Winnipeg and Steinbach right now at 26 degrees, 25s through Portage and Brandon, 27 in Dauphin, the Sound. We're expecting temperatures like that to continue as we get through into sort of the middle part of the week, even toward the end of the week, looking at some temperatures in southern Manitoba close to that 30 mark, which we'll talk about a bit later on here. So satellite radar right now, mainly sunny skies through the Red River Valley, Winnipeg, the Interlake into northwestern Ontario. Some cloud building into Westman, though. This ahead of an upper trough that will pass through Montana, through central Saskatchewan, into sort of central northern Manitoba. And what this will do is bring a bit of precipitation through the Parkland region. So areas like Dauphin, Swan River, looking at some precipitation as we get through Tuesday. For Monday, though, we're looking at mainly sunny skies. Not a lot to talk about today. It's once we get into Tuesday that we're looking at the potential for some showers through sort of the afternoon hours into the evening, maybe a few rumbles of thunder through the Parkland, northern Interlake, and I'm talking far northern Interlake, places like Fairford through Grand Rapids, potentially looking at some thunderstorms through the later afternoon. Tuesday into Wednesday, a better chance for some showers into early Wednesday through that area between Thompson, Bunnabonaby, Oxford House, through God's Lake. Good chance we could see some much-needed rain moving through that region Wednesday. But with that comes those southerly winds that we've been watching. So we're looking at sort of a double-edged sword here. Some rain, but the winds picking up out of the south as we get through Tuesday into Wednesday. Forecast today for southern Manitoba, looking at temperatures close to 30, 29s for Dauphin, Brandon, Swan River, 28 for Winnipeg, Pinawa, 26 in Kenora and Fort Francis, 23 in Dryden. Fairly sunny day across the province today. Not a lot to talk about. Tuesday, 29 degrees in Winnipeg, 27 on Wednesday. A good chance we could see some showers here in the Red River Valley as we get through Thursday. Weak area of instability will start to push through the Dakotas. That will bring us that chance of showers on Thursday. And then temperatures rebounding once again close to 30 by the time we get to the weekend. No 30s in the 7-day forecast, Chloe, but certainly temperatures in that 28, 29 as we get into next week as well.
Well, thank you for keeping an eye on all of this, Riley. And
yes.
yeah, looking forward to updates as we learn more.
And I will mention, Watch for those south winds tomorrow, 20 gusting 40 in southern Manitoba.
Ooh,
So a
okay.
bit of a clip tomorrow, breezy, I'll call it. But yeah, just keep that in mind.
Thanks, Riley.
No problem.
That's ABC's Riley Lachuk. The date is August 19th, and while that does kind of sound like the end of summer, you still got a few weeks here to enjoy the rest of the season. But where are the kids? Decades ago, you'd see kids outdoors from sunlight to sundown, but the Canadian nonprofit organization Participaction says too many are too sedentary. Only 39% of Canadian kids and teens are doing the recommended physical activity level of 60 minutes a day. So how does that compare with how much outdoor activity you enjoyed as a kid? How did you spend your summer days? What do you think needs to help get more kids outside moving and socializing in person with their friends? Our phone lines are now open. We want to hear from you in Winnipeg. You can call 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. Tell us about what play looked like during the summer when you were a kid, or what it looks like now for your kids. You can also text us 204-588-7355. That's 204-588-7355. Joining us from Toronto is Lee Vanderloo. She's a scientific director with Participaction. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Thank you so much for having me.
So those statistics on screen time and sedentary behavior, they're certainly attention grabbing. Can you tell us a bit more about those findings?
Yeah, so what we've been seeing is certainly with regards to physical activity, levels remain low, sedentary behaviors are creeping up, not surprisingly, given that screens are really, very omnipresent. They're everywhere we go. It's how kids today are not only completing schoolwork, but it's also how they're staying connected and socializing with their peers and what they're choosing in terms of a possible recreation activity. So very, very present, definitely competing, and potentially, there has been some research to suggest it's actually displacing available time that they would or could be otherwise spending getting active or outdoors. Now, with regards to only 39% of children and youth meeting national guidelines, if we parse that data a little bit further and we look specifically at how much of that time is actually spent outdoors, we're seeing that only about 22% of kids and teens between the ages of 5 and 17 are actually spending 2 hours a day engaged in some sort of either indoor, outdoor, kind of unstructured, active or energetic play. So that's even less when we think about, any kids that might be currently enrolled in some sort of structured activity or sport outside of school, or what they're currently getting in school. So it's certainly an area that we certainly want to focus on. We know that kids being outdoors get so many more benefits, not just physical activity, but they also start to, it's great for their mental health to be outdoors and exposed to natural sunlight. They also tend to become more responsible and better stewards or champion for the environment overall, since they are spending more time and actually interacting with the environment.
I'm curious about some of the other reasons kids might not be getting enough outdoor play that perhaps aren't screen related. I think about things like the environment or the location of where a kid might live, or perceptions of safety.
Absolutely. I mean, that plays a huge role. We see it time and time again in the research, anecdotally, and also, in consultations with parents or even educators. Depending on where you're located, is it a rural or urban location, or is it more of a suburban location? Do you have any green spaces available to you, well-lit areas? Do you feel that your neighborhood is safe enough to let your kids go outdoors and play if you can't be there to supervise? What does that look like? Do you have a house with a backyard versus, say, an apartment or condo living? So those are certainly things to consider. And then I would say another thing would be a social perspective, as I think, we very much have transitioned over the last few years to, trying to make things as safe as possible rather than as safe as necessary. And really removing opportunities for children to engage in more of that free ambulatory play outdoors without it being very highly supervised or highly structured. it comes from a place, of fear of parents or even, educators wanting to keep children safe, wanting to protect them from any dangers such as abductions or any serious, injuries. But we do know from the research is that there's a lot more for children to gain being outdoors rather than being kept indoors. And perhaps, we can reconsider whether there is a need to, bubble wrap our kids as much as we do.
Right. I know growing up, I grew up in a small town, and my backyard was it faced a park. So I kind of had the perfect situation where my family felt more than comfortable with me just heading out the back door, heading to the park, playing outside. Lee, I'm curious about how did you play as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky. I have 2 sisters and we're all close in age. So it made for natural playmates. And so I think there was always some additional comfort with my parents letting us be outside because there was always 3 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily the neighborhood we grew up with also backed onto a forest. So I'm originally from Alberta and now I've been in Ontario, but we're fortunate to be exposed to quite a bit of outdoors from a young age, and we're encouraged to do so. But of course, anytime, someone in the neighborhood did fall and break their arm, and I was also one of those kids that fell out of a tree and broke their arm, it did cause pause that, my mom was a little bit, more was like, oh, maybe we'll play closer too. And then, loosen the reins again. So, I understand that, but those things happen. And again, not necessarily, the worst case serious injuries. When we actually look at the stats in terms of how many, true emergency care visits kids are going to, they're way lower than we think. And same with when it comes to any form of, abduction. It's RCMP reports around only about 1 in 14 million actually happens of a complete stranger abduction. So again, I think, it's important for us to be aware of actually how serious these things are. And of course, there is a time and place for safety and ensuring that things are done as responsibly, as healthily as possible, but also being aware of by trying to be too safe, we really do remove a lot of opportunities for children, not just to get active, but for their decision-making, overall curiosity, and interaction with not just socially with their peers, but their environment as well.
And if you want to join our conversation, we want to hear from you. Maybe you're thinking back to your summers as a kid. We want to know how did you play as a kid? Do you see that type of play happening these days with kids in this generation? And also, if you have any tips on how you get your kids up and active, we would love to hear from you. You can call us at 204-780-0893, or you can text us 204-588-7355. Now, Lee, I want to talk about you mentioned the perception of risk.
Mm-hmm.
Is it different now? Do parents seem to worry more, or are you seeing kids worrying more about taking risks themselves?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both of those. Plus, I think just in general, like media and reporting, I think, when they're being reported, you think it's happening more often because it's present. We certainly just have better reporting mechanisms than we did in the past, different ways of sharing information. So I think that's one thing. I think for sure our definition of risk, we tend to associate it with something negative. If we say risky play, we kind of all of a sudden think like, ooh, I don't know if that's the type of play I want my child to engage in. But I think it's really looking at the true definition of what risk is that this isn't dangerous play. This is more so the opportunity that they get to become aware of their own limitations, their confidence. They get practice in making, effective decision making, and get to practice and interact with a variety of different, outdoor areas. But I think, and understandably, parents becoming more, or not becoming more, they just are, more, the more that they know, might be a little bit more nervous. And that obviously transfers to children and youth as well. And they're also exposed to a lot of knowing what those potential dangers are. But I think it's putting into context around actually how prevalent are those. And so just being aware of those, I think helps. I think having conversations with your children, even as educators, about the benefits of being outdoor, engaging in this type of play, for all the various benefits, but also how to do it as healthily and responsibly
Right.
as possible as well.
Speaking on that, we heard this morning on Information Radio, our CBC Urban Living contributor Ben Farr weighed in on this subject. I'm going to play a clip here. In his research, he found that risk-taking is actually good for kids.
Well, what we found is that risk for kids helps them to become more independent, more responsible when they eventually become adults. But the difference is that risk versus exposing them to risks versus hazards is very different. Hazards are outside of their control. Things like traffic or broken playground equipment, they're not necessarily things that kids can foresee and manage. Whereas there's risks like playing at speed or playing at height, which are things that kids can definitely manage and that they can explore their limits through. Those risks are important so that they do learn those limits. And again, it makes them more comfortable with understanding their limits and their capabilities as they get older too.
So, Lee, we talked about, that's Ben Farr, our CBC Urban Living contributor. We talked about playing outside as something that's good for physical activity, but how important is taking risks for kids' overall development, not just the physical activity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, physical activity is one, but the other one is certainly around their mental health. So the more that they're outdoors, not just because they're moving, but they're being exposed to natural sunlight. There's tons of research about the benefits of being in outdoors or just green spaces in terms of calming the overall autonomic nervous system. We know that kids, especially post-pandemic, are operating at, many times a higher level of, anxiety symptoms and other internalizing issues. And then from an overall, kind of social development, they tend to display better leadership skills, better decision-making skills, more creative, having that exposure of engaging with various outdoors. So we're looking at younger ages to more of that imaginative play. As we get older, into school age or even early teens, we're seeing that transpire into, improved leadership among your peer groups. Also, again, that kind of creative decision making. And also, again, being aware of your own boundaries, where you feel comfortable, where you want to negotiate those, and where you're like, you know what, this is as far as I go, and to come back without having those opportunities or exposure. It's really hard for children to actually implement and actually gain those experiences and gain that confidence and self-efficacy in making their own decisions in terms of where it feels comfortable and where it doesn't. So collectively, there are just so many benefits above and beyond having that increased opportunity for be outdoors. And we also know the opposite of spending too much time indoors isn't good, not just because of the increased, likelihood to be sedentary, low physical activity, increased exposure to screen use and the content. So whether it's hypersexualized, hyperviolence, and the interactions, but we also know spending too much time increases exposure to a number of different allergens. So increase in upper respiratory issues, and also not having exposure to outdoors and natural sunlight is one of the reasons contributing to why we're seeing increased rates of myopia, so nearsightedness among children.
Interesting. Very interesting. And if you want to join our conversations, I'm really curious about people's thoughts on risky play. What are your boundaries when it comes to risk versus safety? So we want to hear from you. How did you play as a kid? How do your kids play today? And how can we get more kids up and active? In Winnipeg, you can call us at 204-780-0893. Or you can text us 204-588-7355. Lee, I want to ask a question here. How hard is it not to say, be careful, especially with risky play? Are there better phrases or words you can use to encourage a kid to maybe engage in risky play?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, there is looking for some of those, positive prompts instead. Like, we want to be encouraging. So like, that was a great throw, or look how fast you went, waiting also for their reaction. We've seen it when young kids, they might fall and then they immediately look to their parent to kind of mimic what type of reaction should I be having.
Yeah.
And so like, you're okay, like, get a good job. Like, that was such a great run, or such a good, of course, if the child is, actually very injured, they will start crying. And of course, that is, the time to go care, console, bond with the child. Absolutely. But yeah, we want to be encouraging in terms of anytime they choose to go outside. We want to be providing prompts in terms of like, oh, that's great. that was such a high jump? Do you think you could jump even higher? If there's a moment that they do something that is something that's like a little too risky, like obviously if we're talking about, hazards like around traffic, it's the importance of ensuring that children know how to interact and be within those environments safely. So whether it's going on walks with your kids and looking like, okay, like this is how, if you're going to cross the street, you only cross it here and you only cross it when, that the walking signal is on, like things such as that. And we also know that as parents, not only just providing positive prompts, but attending outdoor events or social events, sporting events is great for them as well, but also co-participating. So not just modeling, so not just letting your kids see that, look, like we spend a lot of time outdoors too, or I'm gardening or whatever that might be, but also co-participating with your kids. So, sometimes, that opportunity, it's not necessarily structured, but getting them more exposed and just seeing the benefits and the joys of being outdoor. If they're seeing you having a good time and you're, co-participating, like throwing around a ball or kicking a soccer ball, just sort of pick up that also provides them, they start to feel more secure in that environment. And then I think also you as a parent, seeing them interact with that and knowing like, okay, they know how to interact. Like if the ball runs across the road, they're not just darting after it. They're taking the time to look. That's going to help you feel more confident too with letting them be outdoors, without you.
Right. So setting those boundaries, but letting the risks happen within the boundaries.
Exactly. And then you start to feel more confident, then, you don't necessarily always feel the need to have to be present at all times. And then it's just so it's okay to take a stepwise approach to it.
Right. We have a caller on the line here, Robert. He says he experienced growing up and spending time out on the farm. We're just going to get you on the line, Robert. Sorry, the phone is across from me. So, Wendy, our director, if you could send Rob through, I'd appreciate that. Hello, Rob.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Hello. Yes. You want to share a little bit about a whole different world when it comes to outdoor play. You grew up on a farm.
Oh, yeah. We grew on a farm. We had our cousins right across the road, so there was a minimum of 5 to 6 kids. Wasn't hard to get the baseball team together. My dad dug a wet hole in the yard that became the local swimming hole. So there was up to 25, 30 kids coming down, to swim in the hole. So it was a different time. And we had larger families. So all the investment wasn't just into a child or 2 children. You had an interest of lots of the neighbors had 6 and 8 kids.
How do you think growing up with that community and with that ability to take risks and play outside kind of just freely, how do you think that impacted the way you live your life now?
Well, I pass it on to my grandkids. I'm fortunate to have 5 grandkids within walking distance of the 129-year-old farm. And I encourage them to take some risks and get out with the animals. They have chickens and pigs and horses, and you're going to ride a horse, you're going to fall off, you might break an arm, but the pleasure you'll get from a lifetime of riding the horse well overcomes the risk of falling off and breaking an arm or
right. It seems like it's worth the risk.
Oh, wow. And climbing a tree, build a fort. I realize the importance of computers and different things. I graduated high school in 77. There was no computers. We graduated from diploma of university in 82, and they brought computers in 83. And when we took typing in 1975, we thought it was an easy credit. Who will ever use typing again? Times have changed huge, but we definitely can lose a lot if we don't encourage the kids to get outside and take some risks and learn. Because if you bubble wrap your kids, you're not doing them any favors, because one day they'll be in a situation, and if they've never faced any risk before, they'll panic.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for calling. We're just running out of time here, so I want to go back to Lee. Lee, something I noticed about Robert was the idea that you might break an arm. He said it so casually. What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think Robert had some really great, excellent points about that. And I think, yeah, the broken, like, I think that puts it into perspective. I mean, I was one of those kids climbing the tree that broke my arm, but it never deterred me. Like, I got a cast and, you're still out there. It made my mom, maybe run some reminders of like, when the branches start to get a bit too thin, you might want to rethink what you're doing or jumping on the branches. And yeah, I continued climbing trees afterwards, but I think that's what we're putting into consideration. Like, kids will scrape their knees and that was okay, but I see so few kids too. And again, just being in my 30s, but thinking in the last 3 years, I rarely see kids with skinned knees anymore. And that was just such a typical thing of coming back after the summer. We're just really trying to remove any opportunity of any discomfort for our children and youth. And what we're seeing is kids, by doing that, kids are not actually getting healthier. We don't have a healthier cohort of children in Canada, despite, this way of thinking. And again, it comes from a good place. So this isn't about, pointing fingers or blaming. I think it's just rethinking. How can we just reconceptualize what risky play or what outdoor active play looks like in a way that we're still, keeping kids safe, but we're still not removing these potential opportunities, because that is going to do a much greater disservice in the long run.
Well, Lee, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat as well. Take care.
Lee Vanderloo is a scientific director with Participaction Canada. She joined us by Zoom from Toronto. And now I kind of want to go outside and play. Maybe that's what I'll do after the show here on Radio Noon. Maybe that's what you'll do too. Sounds like a great afternoon. Thank you so much for listening to Radio Noon today. And thank you to our team on the show. Dylan Longhurst is our technician behind the boards here. Wendy Parker, our show director. Travis Peterson is running the YouTube live stream. I'm Chloe Friesen filling in for Janet Stewart here on Radio Noon. Thank you so much for listening. Still lots of great stuff to listen to, all sorts of stories, all sorts of new things to learn. Up next is The Next Chapter.